Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Levy-McLeod. I'll be your moderator for today's news conference. Just a reminder to my media colleagues on the line, there'll be one question and one follow-up from each reporter. Please mute your lines if you haven't already. I'd like to now introduce the Honourable Stephen McNeil, Premier of Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Sarah, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
We'll go first to Mike Gorman, CBC News. Mike, you can go ahead with your question.
Thanks. Morning, Premier. Not many of these left for you. We got details today, quite extensive details about what the province has had to do to mitigate the financial impacts of COVID-19. And along with that word that the province is now looking at approval to be able to borrow another $1 billion, up to another $1 billion if necessary. I wonder, no one disputes that the need is there, Premier, but I guess when we're talking about such a large sum of money, why do you think that there should not be some level of debate on this spending and these decisions?
I never said there shouldn't be.
Mike, you can go ahead with your follow-up.
Well, Premier, respectfully, you're not having a fall sitting, so if you're not going to have any debate since last spring sitting, how and when is there supposed to be during your tenure as Premier?
Oh, you mean we're not debating it on your timeline or someone else's? It'll get debated eventually, I'm sure. The reality of it is we have the responsibility to govern the province. We've been doing that for 7 years since I've been here. I'll continue to do it. The decisions that I've made are being judged by every Nova Scotian every day. You're being judged by reporters who determined to make their call and write their stories as they like to write them. There's been no lack of judgment on any decision I made, or quite frankly, debate on decisions that I've made. And I look forward to continuing out my term and continuing to provide good government to the people of Nova Scotia.
Thank you. Next, I'll go to Lindsay Armstrong, allnovascotia.com. Lindsay, go ahead with your question.
Hi, Premier. I'm hearing from some daycare operators that they've been fully booked for that extra week over the holidays, and parents are worried about extra time off. They're not able to work from home. Are there any plans to add childcare spots for that time period?
That'd be a better question for the Minister of Education, who's responsible for that. But we continue, daycares will continue to operate as they have really since September. When we opened them in June, there was obviously a slow opening where it was at 50% at the beginning, but we fully expect them to operate, and whether or not there will be any additional spots added would be a good question for the Minister.
Lindsay, you can go ahead with your follow-up. Lindsay, do you have a follow-up? Next, I'll go to Natasha Hayes, CTV. Natasha, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. Premier, this is for a colleague. Wondering if holiday restrictions go too far and punish those in parts of the province that have had few cases.
Well, there's been very little change. I live in rural Nova Scotia. Outside of HRM and really across the province, there was the limit of 10 per household. That has always been in place. We reduced it in HRM when we had that the beginning of the second wave down to 5. What Dr. Strang announced yesterday is that the 10 per household would be consistent across the province again. What we also said in other parts of the province was that through this period of time, the holiday season, that we were reducing hours in restaurants and drinking establishments for a period of time, reducing it, I think service stops at 10, they need to be closed at 11. That's not too restrictive. It's not too much to ask, quite frankly, when we have businesses in restaurants and bars in Halifax that are closed completely until January 11th. I don't think it's too much to ask of those operating in rural Nova Scotia. And what we're asking of citizens is to go from point A to point B. We're trying to deal with a deadly virus, but we're also at the same time trying to allow people the opportunity to spend time with family. And we're asking for the cooperation of Nova Scotians, and for 10 months they've been continuing to follow the public health protocols, and I urge them to do that through this period of time. Let's make sure this is truly what the season should be, a celebration, and not one where we come back in January where we have to deal with a massive outbreak of COVID-19.
Natasha, you can go ahead with your follow-up.
Thank you. Premier, this is also for a colleague. We are hearing from restaurant owners who are frustrated they can't open their business in a normal sense and be profitable, but are seeing places like food courts and other businesses be allowed to open up. What do you say to them about their concerns?
So listen, I understand their frustration. I really do. But there's no denying the fact that when we were getting our second wave, the asymptomatic spread in some of those places was causing great concern. We needed to get the virus under control. We will continue to do that. The issue about the food court, I think Dr. Strang spoke yesterday around this time of the year, why he made that decision. Minister McClellan and the Department of Business have been working with the respective associations to try to deal with the challenges that businesses are facing with. We will have another round of he announced the program. I think the applications will be out in the coming, I think sometime in the next week, to allow those businesses that we closed because of the order to apply in for another support grant.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Brian Flynn from allnovascotia.com. Brian, go ahead with your question.
Thanks, Sarah. Premier, I'd like to ask you, just in terms of today's fiscal update, there's still a significant deficit. It's a little better than it was last summer, but I'm wondering, going forward, when would you like to see your successor try to balance the budget? How, I realize we're still in a pandemic, but how many years out do you think it ought to be before Nova Scotia really makes an effort to get back to a balanced budget?
That'll be a good question for whoever follows me. I will continue to govern the way I've had for 7 years until my time is up, but I will then not provide commentary on the next government and what their vision is. That'll be up to them to communicate that to Nova Scotians.
Ryan, you can go ahead with your follow-up.
Thanks. Premier, about tomorrow's prorogation ceremony, you've asked the opposition not to attend. Have you heard back from them, I'm wondering? And I'm also wondering why it is that it's the opposition, both opposition parties are saying this is a workplace, not a gathering place, and the 5-person limit should not apply.
I think actually, if you go back to what Dr. Strang said, if you can work virtually, you should. And if the legislature can't operate virtually, I'm not sure what workplace can. We've seen publicly traded companies having virtual shareholders meetings. What we're dealing with is an archaic rule at the legislature that would say we'd have to go over and debate on the floor a motion about whether or not we could actually meet virtually before we could meet virtually. And the opposition have chosen not to do that. They've actually forced. They want to go to the legislature. There's no debate tomorrow. It's being prorogued. Go in, the Lieutenant Governor will come in, putting his health at risk, and those of other members. Meetings in the legislature are actually happening. Today there was one virtually, but yet the opposition parties are choosing to politicize this issue. I sit here for 10 months to Dr. Strang, encouraging Nova Scotians to follow the rules. I'm going tomorrow to break public health protocol because they're forcing me to do it. Think about that. I got a letter from one of the caucuses, the NDP caucus, comparing the work they do to healthcare workers. Think about that for a minute. They're comparing the work they do to nurses. How many nurses could virtually give you the vaccine? There's no reason they couldn't sit and do that committee meeting virtually. They're doing committee meetings virtually now. They could do the legislature. But they're forcing us to break public health protocols. What message are we sending to Nova Scotians? The rules don't apply to elected officials. We can ignore public health. I've sat here for 10 months, next to Dr. Strang, asking Nova Scotians to help us control this pandemic. And the opposition couldn't do one thing on behalf of all Nova Scotians to try to keep people safe. Instead, they tried to flex what they believe is their political muscle to actually put in jeopardy people's health. They got their way. We'll go, we'll bring the Lieutenant Governor in, we'll prorogue the House tomorrow, and we'll go about our business. But I'm going to have to tell people that I have to ignore the public health protocols because the two opposition people think they're equivalent to healthcare workers. They're equivalent to teachers. They're equivalent to people who have been working their tails off on behalf to keep us safe, when the very job they do could have easily happened virtually. They have no role tomorrow. Lieutenant Governor's proroguing it. But they want to prove their point. And what they're proving is that they believe they're more important, themselves are more important than sending a clear message to Nova Scotians about the health and safety protocols that are in place. But I have no choice. So I want to make sure every Nova Scotian who's listening, I have no choice. I have worked on your behalf for 10 months to try to keep you safe, to try to protect your families, to try to ensure that we were able to lead the country, along with Dr. Strang, about ensuring we control this pandemic. And tomorrow morning, I am being forced by the opposition in this province to break that very thing I'm asking you to do. The very thing I'm asking you to do over the holidays to keep our province safe by keeping your gatherings at 10. I am being forced by the opposition to cross the street with more than 15 people. I want you to think about that the next time you go to the polls. All the sacrifice you've made, all the sacrifice you've made over the last 10 months, all we ask from our elected officials to join you, to be a little courageous, to do things a bit differently. But instead, they put their own self-interests ahead of yours. I encourage you to tune in tomorrow to watch the exercise itself and the arrogance of the people elected in this province who are going to force the Premier of this province, the very person who's been working with you, to break the public health protocols of Dr. Strang, who I've sat next to now here for months on your behalf.
Next, we'll go to Jean Laroche, CBC Radio. Jean?
Sorry, Sarah, he hasn't joined the call yet.
Okay, we'll go to Alicia Draus, Global. Alicia, do you have a question?
I do. Premier, I just am looking to get your reaction. I mean, yesterday we learned news that the search for the fishermen has been suspended and that the case is now being handed over to the RCMP. So I'm just looking again for your reaction and if you have any message to the families that have been affected.
I've said this many times. This has been a year like none other. The level of sadness and death this province has experienced has been unbelievable, not just from the pandemic, but as you know, every other event that has happened here, and the heartache the Nova Scotians are feeling. I represent a fishing community along the Bay Shore, the Laps Cove and Hillsburn, where the search was continuing from. My family on my mother's side are fishermen in Cape Breton. It's heartbreaking. There's never a good time of year, but you know, having to enter into this season with those families with such a loss, and even the families who were in that industry who didn't lose someone yesterday have been shaken deeply because they get on their vessels and their families get on their vessels to go out to make a livelihood. So, you know, my message to them is don't give up hope. As difficult as this is, and as hard as this is, we as a province and we as community will rally around you and do our best to help lessen the pain of your reality and do all we can to kind of help you in the days ahead.
Thank you, Premier.